A wonderful morning, dear children. Today, our topic of discussion is the chapter The Little Prince. Before we start, we will start our day with a good thought. Yesterday is for memories, tomorrow is an imagination, but today is real gift. Have a pleasant day. So, children, live your life today. Don't wait for tomorrow and don't repent for yesterday. Live your life for today, children. With this thought, we will start our today's lesson, The Little Prince. Who was the little prince? Let us see. Before we go to Little Prince, let us know who has written this story, The Little Prince. This story, Little Prince, is written by the famous French writer, author, poet, and even an aviator. You know who is an aviator? One who flies a plane. So he was an aviator also. What was his name? His name was Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry was a French writer, aviator, poet, and author. Raised in an aristocratic family, he fell in love with aviation at an early age after he took his first airplane ride at the age of 12. So he took his first airplane ride at the age of 12, and since then he fell in love with aviation. He received his pilot's wings during his compulsory military services 1922, around which time he also began to write. So he had to take a compulsory military service, and this happened in the year 1922, and this was the time when he also started writing the stories or poets or whatever. His adventures as a pilot would supply the inspiration for all of his literary endeavors. So the basis of his stories are based upon his experience, his adventures as a pilot, which culminated with the 1943 publication of the classic The Little Prince. And when his adventures got published in 1943 with the name of the story The Little Prince. It's actually a book, okay, The Little Prince. From a literary perspective, his most important work was the children's fable for adults, The Little Prince. So it was written for the children, but it had a moral for the adults. So children's fable for adults. It is considered one of the greatest books in the 20th century and is one of the best-selling books of all time. So it is considered to be a greatest book of the 20th century, becoming the subject of numerous adaptations, including a Grammy-winning children's album. So Grammy Award is a very prestigious award. So this book was also became the subject of the Grammy-winning children's album. Who are the characters in the story? The Little Prince, the narrator himself, and the grown-ups. What do you mean by grown-ups? Grown-ups means the adults. Now let us discuss the story at a glance. The narrator begins with a discussion on the nature of grown-ups and their inability to perceive especially important things. So a child always feels that a grown-up is unable to understand the dreams and not only the dreams, the expressions, the imaginations of a child. And that is what the story is all about, and the author also wants to portray that thing through his story. As a test to determine if a grown-up is enlightened and like a child, he shows them a picture that he drew at the age of 6 depicting a snake which has eaten an elephant. So he draws a picture of a snake which has eaten an elephant. And then he goes and shows this picture to his parents or other grown-up people to just see, to just determine if those grown-up people have that enlightenment and is like a child to understand the imagination of a child. The grown-ups always replied that the picture depicts a hat, and so he knows to talk of reasonable things to him rather than fanciful. So all the grown-up people seeing that picture tells him that it was no way related to anything except a hat. Clear? So then he understands that grown-ups cannot perceive things which are fanciful, and they can only understand things which are realistic, which have reasons to support. The narrator becomes a pilot, and one day his plane crashes in the Sahara, far from civilization. He has 8 days of water supply and must fix his airplane to be saved. So he was a pilot, and one day what happens? His plane crashes in the Sahara Desert. Not only crashes in the Sahara Desert, it crashes in a place which is far, far away from civilization. Then he had only 8 days of water supply and had to fix his airplane in order to save his life. Then what happens? So see this story, this is the author. He is the author, Anthony de Saint-Exupéry, with his plane after the crash in Sahara Desert. So this is the plane which has crashed in the Sahara Desert and he is standing there. Okay. In the middle of the desert, the narrator is unexpectedly greeted by a young boy who is nicknamed as the Little Prince. So now he unexpectedly he meets a young boy who is nicknamed as the Little Prince. Upon encountering the narrator, the Little Prince asks him to draw a sheep. So meeting the narrator, the little boy asks the narrator to draw a sheep. The narrator, what he does? He first shows his old picture of the elephant inside the snake to the little boy. And surprisingly, the little boy, that is the Little Prince, interprets it correctly. He, seeing that picture, immediately says that this is the picture of a snake which has eaten up an elephant. Thus, the narrator becomes very happy, and even he is shocked to see that the picture was so nicely and interpreted correctly. Then he starts drawing the sheep on the request of the Little Prince. But each time he drew the sheep, the prince rejected it. So let us see. After 3 failed attempts at drawing a sheep, the frustrated narrator simply draws a box. So he draws a box, claiming that the sheep the prince wants is inside the box. So what he says, that the sheep that he wants to see has not yet come out. It's too small, so it's inside the box. And surprisingly, the prince exclaims that this was exactly the drawing he wanted. So the narrator was surprised to hear that this was exactly what the prince wanted. So through this story, what can we learn? What is the moral? The moral, what the author wants to depict through the story, the author wants to tell us that the grown-ups doesn't understand the fancies of the world. They are too realistic. But the author also had a child inside him, and that is why only another child, that is the little prince, was able to understand the fancy drawn by the author. Clear? What is the theme of the story? The little prince draws unflattering portraits of grown-ups as being narrow-minded. So, he says that the grown-ups are narrow-minded. They cannot open up their mind to the fancies of the world, to the beauties of the world. They only know what is realistic. In contrast, children come to wisdom through open-mindedness and a willingness to explore the world around them and within themselves. And in contrast to the grown-ups, what do the children do? They have an open-mindedness attitude, and they are always willing to explore the whole world around them and also within themselves.